Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Okay, so now we start a new chapter. We're finished with the detailed analysis of the Chaitasikas, so you don't have to worry anymore about how many Chaitasikas or mental factors are present in each citta. Now we're going to be sort of focusing on the cittas themselves. Okay, so this chapter is called, in Pali, Pakinaka Sangaha, which is translated here as Compendium of the Miscellaneous. Of course, this chapter is not going to be taking only one topic, but it's going to be taking, as we'll say, I think it's 6 topics. 6 topics. Okay, so the opening verse states, do you like to read together? Okay, so we'll read the verse together. Sampayutta yata yogam te panasa sabhavato citta cetasika dhamma te sangdani yatarahang vedana hetuto kicha dvaralambana vatuto chitupada vaseneva sangaho nama niyate. Okay, so the meaning is that having explained the 53 associated states, the 53 states are, we have the 52 chaitasikas, the mental factors, and then we add to that the citta, and so the citta taken all as one, and the 52 mental factors taken separately, so that makes 53 states. So having explained these 53 states, now he's going to be taking the citta, the consciousness, as the basis, and deal concisely with the classification of the citta by way of these are the 6 topics of this chapter, by way of feelings, by way of roots, by way of functions, doors, objects, and bases. Okay, so these are the 6 topics that are going to be used as a basis for understanding the cittas. Okay, so the first topic here is Vedana, or feeling. And so now the text says, in the compendium of feeling, there are first 3 kinds of feeling, namely pleasant, painful, and then there's the feeling that's neither painful nor pleasant. And then again, feeling is analyzed as 5-fold, as pleasure, pain, joy, displeasure, and equanimity. Okay, so we've already seen in our discussion of the various kinds of cittas that some are associated with well, let's take it this way. Okay, the nature of feeling. So feeling is, as we saw, it's a universal mental factor. So it's present, some feeling is present in every citta. Every citta has some way of experiencing the flavor of the object. Or we could say that every citta has some kind of felt tone to it. Either a pleasant tone, a painful tone, or a neither pleasant nor painful tone, a neutral tone. And so in the suttas, mostly in the suttas, feeling is analyzed in three ways, simply as pleasant feeling, painful feeling, or what's called adukkama sukha vedana. That's the feeling that's not painful, not pleasant. And so when we speak about, when we use the three types of feeling, then pleasant feeling includes all pleasant feeling, whether bodily or mental. And then similarly, painful feeling includes all painful feeling, whether physical or mental. But there's another way of analyzing feeling used even in the suttas as well as the Abhidhamma, and that is feeling is analyzed as fivefold. And so when feeling is analyzed as fivefold, it's called 5 kinds of faculty. The Pali word is indriya. So we speak about sukha indriya, the faculty of pleasure, dukkha indriya, the faculty of pain, then somanassa indriya, the faculty of joy, domanassa indriya, the faculty of displeasure, and upekkha indriya, the faculty of the neutral feeling. Okay, so how do we relate the 3 types of feeling to the 5 types of feeling? Okay, so this explanation says, when the fivefold analysis of feeling is considered, then the pleasant feeling of the threefold scheme becomes divided into pleasure and joy. So in this way of speaking, dukkha vedana, that's the painful feeling, is divided, maybe I will use let me use my notepad. Let me get a blank file. Okay, so we have, according to the usual way in the suttas, we have these 3 kinds of feelings. Now, when we bring in the fivefold scheme, I think we start with Sukha Vedana. Okay, so this is the threefold scheme of feelings. So to make this fivefold, pleasant feeling becomes somanassa is equated with the mental pleasant feeling. And then the word sukha is used, but here the word sukha has a more limited meaning. Here, sukha means only bodily pleasant feeling. And as we'll see, this is the feeling in only one citta. And that one citta is the body consciousness, the wholesome resultant. Body consciousness. So all the other kinds of pleasant feeling are mental pleasant feeling. And so those are called somanassa. And the word sukha is then restricted only to the bodily pleasant feeling. Whoops. Okay, so when we use the fivefold scheme, then dukkha vedana, painful feeling, which on the threefold scheme means all painful feeling, gets subdivided into two types. So we have domanassa, which is what I've been translating as displeasure, which is mental painful feeling. And somanassa is what we translated as joy. So domanassa, displeasure, is mental painful feeling. And then dukkha is only the bodily painful feeling. And this occurs only in one citta, that is the unwholesome resultant body consciousness. If you remember this table on page 43, you could see where it has the classification of the feeling that goes with the rootless cittas. So you could see that the body consciousness has pain. And this is the unwholesome resultant body consciousness has painful feeling, and the wholesome resultant body consciousness has pleasure. Okay, then we have this third type of feeling, which is called adukkama sukha. Adukkha means not painful. Asukha means not pleasant. So that's feeling that's neither painful nor pleasant feeling. And on the fivefold scheme, this then becomes equated with what is called upekkha. Let's call this 3, 4. Then this becomes the 5th, upekkha, which is neutral feeling. And then it strikes me as a little puzzling. Again, I also have my own questions sometimes about Abhidhamma. And this actually goes not only for Abhidhamma, this also goes back to the suttas. It seems the neutral feeling, if we look at that chart, this equanimity accompanies eye, ear, nose, and tongue consciousness, both unwholesome resultant and wholesome resultant. And then we also get this neutral feeling in, for example, the wholesome sense sphere types of consciousness, and also in the higher formless jhanic kinds of consciousness. And it seems to me that there should be a difference between the kind of feeling, neutral feeling that arises with eye consciousness, ear consciousness, and so on, and the kind of neutral feeling that will arise, say, in a sense sphere wholesome consciousness. But a distinction is not made between them. Simply they're all grouped together simply under this heading of upekkha, or neutral feeling. Okay, so from this we could see how, according to one scheme, we have 3 types of feelings, and then by making a distinction within the pleasant feeling and the painful feeling, between the bodily and the mental, we arrive at 5 kinds of feeling. So let us go back to the text. No, I can't find it. I put it down there. Okay, so just we could look through some of this explanation. So pleasure or sukha, this is for the 5 types of feeling, has, in fact, I don't think this explanation is satisfactory. Pleasure has the characteristic of experiencing a desirable, tangible object. That is valid, that's correct. Pain has the characteristic of experiencing an undesirable, tangible object. That's because the body consciousness takes a tangible object, something that affects the sense of touch. Through the body, we don't see forms, we don't hear sounds, but through the body sense, all we experience are tangible objects. And so if the tangible object is considered desirable, then the bodily feeling is pleasant, pleasure. If it's an undesirable tactile object, if I bang my foot against the sidewalk or hit my head against the bedstead, then I feel pain. So that's an undesirable object, and there's a painful feeling. Yeah, this is where I think it's not quite satisfactory. It says joy has the characteristic of experiencing a desirable object, and displeasure has the characteristic of experiencing an undesirable object. Yeah, the reason I say this is not completely satisfactory is because through the training of the mind, we can change the way we experience an object. So, suppose I'm experiencing, maybe somebody is speaking harsh words to me and saying, "You stupid fool, you don't know anything." Okay, so that would be an undesirable object, those words. And sort of normally, if I don't have a trained mind, then if somebody speaks to me like that, I'll get angry or upset. So in that case, domanassa, displeasure, will arise. But if I've trained the mind, then I can reflect, this person is abusing me because of his own problems, and so I shouldn't no reason for me to get upset with his words, no reason for me to feel displeasure. Instead, I should feel compassion towards him. And in that case, I can give rise to equanimity, or I could even give rise to kind of joy of gratitude towards this person for giving me the opportunity to practice patience and equanimity and compassion. And similarly, if I meet a desirable object, somebody praises me and says, "You're so wonderful, you're so great," then, if I have an untrained mind, then I give rise to joy and thinking, what a wonderful person this is. So intelligent. Okay, but if I have the trained mind, then I can reflect praise and blame are always impermanent, unreliable. So if I get attached to that praise and feel joy, then if the praise changes and that person loses his appreciation of my teachings and gets upset with me, then his praise will turn to blame. Then I'll get upset. So instead of feeling joy at this praise, a desirable object, I can regard it with equanimity and with a neutral feeling. So let's say normally joy and displeasure are related to desirable object and undesirable object, but this is not a fixed relationship. Okay, then equanimity has the characteristic of being felt as neutral. Okay, so these are now the 5 kinds of feelings, and now we come to the important section where the text is going to show which kinds of consciousness, which kinds of chittas are associated with which kinds of feelings. Okay, first the easy ones, or the simple ones, which I've already touched on. Okay, so taking all of these, the wholesome resultant body consciousness is the only one accompanied by pleasure. This is in the fivefold scheme. I'm going to need 2 computers. When I pull up one screen, the other disappears and I have to search for it. Okay, so we see here, so sukha in the fivefold scheme is associated only with bodily it means only bodily pleasant feeling, and it occurs only in one citta, the wholesome resultant body consciousness. And then the unwholesome resultant body consciousness is the only citta accompanied by pain, by painful bodily feeling. Okay, then there are 62 cittas accompanied by joy. So what are these 62? Let's go to the next page. 18 kinds of sense sphere consciousness. And here it's useful to look at the table of different chittas so that you could glance the meaning you could take in the meaning at a glance. For example, we can look at the table on page 70. And so we have 18 types of sense sphere consciousness. And so we have 4 rooted in greed. In the table, you could see there are 8 rooted in greed. 4 are associated with joy, and the other 4 with equanimity. So 4 rooted in greed. Then there are 12 types of sense sphere beautiful consciousness. That is, there are 4 wholesome chittas associated with joy. There are 4 resultant beautiful chittas associated with joy, and 4 functional chittas associated with joy. Then there are the 2 rootless chittas, the joyful investigating consciousness and the smiling consciousness. And so we put these all together, 4 from greed, 12 sense sphere beautiful, 2 rootless, so that makes the 18 types. Then there are 44 types of sublime. The sublime means fine material sphere and immaterial sphere. So sublime and supramundane consciousness pertaining to the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th jhanas. So we know that the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th jhanas have pleasant feeling, and that pleasant feeling is somanassa, joy. And so we have 4 jhanas, which can be wholesome, resultant, and functional. So that's 4 becomes, taken by 3 times, becomes 12. And then the 4 jhanas can also occur at the level of the 4 paths, that's 16, and at the level of the 4 fruits. The fruits of stream entry, once returning, non-returning, arahatship. So we take the 4 jhanas, 4 lower jhanas, at the level of the 4 paths and 4 fruits. So we get 16 for paths, 16 for fruits, that makes 32. So the 12 sublime and 32 supramundane makes 44 chittas associated with joy. Okay, then displeasure, domanassa, that grim, sad, unhappy state of mind, that occurs only in the 2 chittas connected with aversion or with hatred. You know, when in Buddhism, when we speak about dukkha, suffering, people think, Buddhism is a pessimistic religion. But that's because we take the word dukkha mistakenly in the narrow sense of misery, unhappiness, sadness, grief, despair. But if we look at the whole system of chittas in the Abhidhamma, we see of the 89 or 121 chittas, only 2 of them are accompanied by displeasure or mental suffering, and only 1 by bodily suffering. All of the others are either joyful or neutral feeling. Okay, so then we have the remaining 55 chittas accompanied by the neutral feeling or equanimity. Then in the explanation, we enumerate those 55 chittas. So we have 6 unwholesome chittas, There are 4 rooted in greed, and then the 2 that are rooted in strong delusion. Those 2 are the doubting consciousness and the restless consciousness. So those 6 unwholesome cittas have neutral feeling. Then 14 rootless cittas. What are these 14? Oh, I have to go back to my book. Okay, I can't find the place, so let me just figure it out. Okay, 14 rootless cittas. So we have eye, ear, nose, tongue consciousness, which can be unwholesome resultant or wholesome resultant. Yeah, actually we could figure this out if we go to the resultant cittas, the table of the resultant cittas. Yeah. Yeah, okay, here. So we have eye, ear, nose, tongue, unwholesome resultant, and wholesome resultant. So 4 and 4, that makes 8. Then we have the 2 kinds of receiving consciousness accompanied by equanimity, unwholesome resultant and wholesome resultant, and the 2 kinds of investigating consciousness accompanied by equanimity. Then we have, coming to the functionals, we have the 5-door adverting and the mind-door adverting. So adding all those up takes us to 14 kinds of rootless cittas accompanied by neutral feeling or equanimity. Then we have 12 sense-sphere beautiful cittas. If we look at the table on page 70, we see that there are 8 wholesome, resultant, and functional. Of those 8, we saw 4 each are accompanied by joyful feeling, so the other 4 are accompanied by neutral feeling. So that makes 12 sense-sphere beautiful cittas. Okay, then when we go to the 5th jhana, then the joyful feeling or pleasant feeling falls away, and the feeling in the 5th jhana is neutral feeling. And the 5th jhana can be wholesome, resultant, or functional. Functional in the case of the Arahat. Then the 5th jhana can also occur at the supramundane, world-transcending level. In that case, it's the jhana in the 4 paths and fruits. And so in that case, we have 8 supramundane cittas connected with neutral feeling. That is the paths and fruits, 4 paths and 4 fruits at the level of the 5th jhana. And the verse just gives a summary. This is extremely useful. Yeah, this table 3.1 will show you with these dots and with the key to the dots. It'll show you which feelings are present in which cittas. Okay, any questions on this? Does it seem fairly clear? Yeah, please.
I have 2 questions.
Good.
The first one has to do with the fact that there's a single body, pleasant, and a single body, pain.
Yeah.
Does that, and they're both resultants, does that mean that all of those feelings in the body have to have a karmic connection?
According to the Abhidhamma system, yeah.
Huh.
Yeah.
And then the second one.
I have to say, I find this a bit strange.
Right, because I thought that the Buddha enumerated all kinds of karmas that...
All kinds of...
types of karma that might impact you that, I don't know.
Yeah, it doesn't mean that karma manifests only through the body consciousness,
Right.
but it means according to the Abhidhamma,
Any pain
all
or any
the
pleasure.
states of bodily feeling, painful and
Or
pleasant, are
karmic.
the results of karma coming to maturity. I find it a little strange, like if I'm walking down the street, say I scrape my foot against, or I'm not looking, and I bang my foot against the curb, and then I get a little pain. It's a little strange that that's some past karma coming to maturity because of my carelessness. Or I'm walking again down the street and a pleasant wind blows, it's been, say, a very hot day, and then a cool wind blows and I get a pleasant bodily feeling from the wind. That is some karma coming to maturity.
Right, but that's what I meant, because I thought that, like nature, that wasn't all...
Well, of course, the nature is a contributing factor, but the fact that I'm experiencing that feeling from the Abhidhammic standpoint is the maturation of
karma. Okay.
a citta. In that case, a pleasant wind blowing would be pleasant bodily feeling, a wholesome karma coming to ripening.
Okay. The second question is more, I'm just being opaque. I don't understand on Guide 3, where number 6, where it says 8 supramundane cittas. That is the paths and fruits pertaining to the 5th supramundane jhana. I don't I'm just not understanding that. Why would there be 8 cittas that are relating to the first 4 jhanas? First 4 levels, all come together at the 5th.
What page is this? Let me just get the page.
117, under Guide, Section 3, number 6.
Okay.
If you could just clarify that sentence, I don't get it.
Okay, this goes back to a point that I explained, perhaps it was late last week, that or maybe it was Monday of this week. Today's Monday. I'm losing track of the day. I think it was last Monday. Okay, there are 40, the paths and fruits, according to the simple way of explanation, there are 4 paths and 4 fruits. But those 4 paths and 4 fruits always occur at a level of jhanic intensity. So, depending upon the skill and concentration and samadhi of the meditator, the paths and fruits can occur at the level of any of the 5 jhanas. And so there are 5 jhanas, and then 4 paths and 4 fruits. So then we have 8 by 5, so there are 40 supramundane cittas. So if we put aside now the 5th jhana, we take the lower 4 jhanas, and then we have 4 paths and 4 fruits, 8. So that's 8 by 4. So 32 cittas occurring with the joyful feeling, because the first 4 jhanas have the joyful or pleasant feeling. But the 5th jhana has the neutral feeling. So then when we take, again, the 4 paths and 4 fruits, with the fifth jhana, then we have 4 plus 4, 8, pertaining to the fifth supramundane jhana. Yeah, so like matters like this, if you simply don't understand, don't hesitate, don't be afraid and think, oh, if I ask a question, everybody's going to look at me and laugh at me. But try to get this, okay, way in the back. Yeah, put it on, yeah.
I'd like to ask about section 3, saying wholesome resultant body consciousness is the only one accompanied by pleasure, unwholesome resultant body consciousness is the only one accompanied by pain. My question is, it's very common to have pleasure at somebody's expense in an unwholesome way. And so how could that result, maybe I'm not reading this correctly, but how could pleasure only be associated with wholesome?
No.
Am I reading it wrong?
No, this is the pleasant feeling in the very, very narrow sense of pleasant bodily feeling. Mm-hmm. And similarly, it's pain in the very narrow sense of painful bodily feeling. Mm-hmm. So you have pleasure at somebody's expense. I mean, there are millions of ways of experiencing pleasure, but there's only one. But that kind of pleasure would be joy, in the fivefold scheme, would be joyful feeling. Mm-hmm. What's meant here by pleasure is simply when I have a pleasant bodily sensation, and by pain when I have a painful bodily sensation.
Okay, all right. I think I was thrown off by the words wholesome resultant and unwholesome resultant.
Yeah,
but
and again, I have to repeat what I said earlier. Wholesome resultant is a result of the wholesome. It's not, the resultant is not wholesome, not unwholesome. Karmically, the result is neutral. But the result can be the result of past wholesome karma or the result of past unwholesome karma.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think so. There's several. Almost like there's a process, or.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, there's a distinction between the wholesome, the unwholesome, and the karmically neutral. Results are karmically neutral, but they are the results of either the unwholesome or the wholesome.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
That's why I was very scrupulous here about putting that hyphen between wholesome and resultant and unwholesome and resultant to mean that the wholesome that it's a result of the wholesome and the result of the unwholesome, not a result that is wholesome or a result that is unwholesome. Okay, please, yeah.
Venerable teacher, since you say not to be embarrassed, I'm going to ask this question. For the last few lectures, actually, I've been wondering the way that the feelings and all these levels of cetasikas are dissected to the most minutest of details. Yeah. I was wondering, like a person like me, how do I make use of this knowledge? And like in this class, I mean, so far, like the pleasure is said to be bodily and joy is supposed to be mental. Yeah. And was wondering if I sit down and think about a particular feeling that I have, how do I identify? You know, because like bodily and mental, sometimes it's really very difficult to separate. Yeah. So what is the, how do I do it and why should I do it, basically?
Okay, I think that's a good question, and I think that I could relate your question to this analysis of feelings here. I won't go into the other Chaitasikas, as that would take days and days. But just taking the matter of feelings, we might think that whenever we experience a bodily feeling or a painful feeling, that we are bound down by the feeling that we're experiencing. Especially when we're experiencing bodily feelings, when we get ill, especially if we have a long-term persistent illness, or we're subject to a lot of physical pains. We might think that because of these physical pains, I'm bound to feel upset and miserable over these pains. But when we understand that there's a distinction between the bodily feeling and the mental feeling, and that the mental feelings can be, if we feel aversion towards the pain, the bodily pain, then that bodily pain is going to be producing states of mind which are accompanied by aversion, or which are rooted in hatred towards the bodily pain. But if we understand the distinction between bodily feeling and mental feeling, then we will know that we could change our attitude towards the bodily pain so that we can endure the pain. So we could look at the pain with equanimity, by looking at the pain with equanimity, by applying reflection to the pain. That this pain, for example, we could reflect, maybe we could use the principle of karma. This pain is the result of some past unwholesome karma. So let me just endure this karma with equanimity, with patience. Then we can be, on the one hand, we are maintaining neutral feeling, equanimous feeling, and at the same time we're developing such qualities as patience, diligence, equanimity, and even wisdom, because we're understanding the impermanent nature and changing nature of that painful feeling. So we're developing even paramis or paramitas just through enduring and contemplating the painful feeling. Okay, and then when we experience, say, pleasant feelings, well, I used this example earlier. If we are not careful and then we let the greed, the citta is rooted in greed, attached to the pleasant feelings, particularly when we meet with either comfortable circumstances or praise from others and honor and fame, if we become attached to that, then we're laying the foundation for unwholesome cittas accompanied by displeasure to arise in the future when circumstances change. But if we understand that these feelings that the praise that we meet, the honor, fame, comfortable circumstances are just maybe results or products of past karma, that they're impermanent, then we can develop equanimity, maintain equanimity in those situations. So that's just one way in which we could apply this analysis. Okay, I want to go on now into the next section. So now we come to the section on roots. This is the compendium of roots. Okay, so let us read, we could read this Pali passage together since it's short. Okay. Hetu sangahe, hetu nama, lobo, doso, moho, alobo, adoso, amoho, chati, chabida bhavanti. Okay, so in the compendium of roots, it said that there are 6 roots. there are 3 unwholesome roots, which are greed, hatred, and delusion. And then there are the 3 opposites, which are non-greed, non-hatred, non-delusion. Okay, then the meaning of the word root, in Pali, the word used is hetu. It's said that, if we look in the guide to number 5, that a root is a mental factor that establishes firmness and stability in the chittas with which it is associated. And the example is given of that of trees that have roots. And so because the tree has roots, the tree is stable and steady. Whereas other plants, or maybe things like dust or leaves, say the leaves that have fallen to the ground don't have roots. And so when the wind blows, then the leaves will move with the wind, but the tree remains firm and steady. And so the chittas that are rootless are said to be weak, relatively weak chittas, the 18 rootless chittas, whereas the other chittas that have roots are strong and steady. Okay, now of the 6 roots that have been mentioned in the text, 3 of them are exclusively unwholesome. That's greed, hatred, and delusion. The other 3 roots, non-greed, non-hatred, non-delusion, are called beautiful roots. Even though in sutta language we would call them wholesome roots, but in Abhidhamma language we call them beautiful roots because they are not necessarily wholesome. They're wholesome when they arise in wholesome chittas, but these beautiful roots can also be present in resultant chittas. And they can also be present in the functional chittas of the Arahat. So the beautiful roots will be wholesome or indeterminate, karmically indeterminate, indeterminate in the resultant chittas and in the functional chittas. Okay, so those are the 6 roots, and now we come to the section on classifying chittas, or classifying the roots by way of the chittas in which they arise. Okay, so we know right off the bat that there are 18 chittas without roots. So those are the 18 we find in the table on page 43. So we have the 5-door adverting consciousness, the 2 sets of 5-fold sense consciousness, unwholesome resultant, wholesome resultant, the 2 kinds of receiving consciousness, 3 kinds of investigating consciousness, then the consciousness that is called determining, which is the same as the mind or adverting, which I'll explain in a little while, and then the Arahat's smiling consciousness. So those are the 18. And then taking the 89 chittas, we subtract those 18, and so the remaining 71 chittas have roots. Okay, so how many roots are present in each of these chittas? Okay, so that's what we're coming to now. Okay, the 2 types of consciousness associated with strong delusion, that is, the doubting consciousness and the restless consciousness, those 2 have only 1 root. And what is that one root? Delusion. Okay, the remaining 10 kinds, or the remaining 10 unwholesome cittas have 2 roots. What are those 2 roots? It's a little tricky question. Okay, the 10 other unwholesome cittas have 2 roots. Wait, you have to speak either loudly or use the microphone.
I think either greed hatred together with delusion. Right?
All 10?
Greed and hatred are exclusive,
Yeah.
right?
So?
They combine with delusion.
Okay, you're on the right track, but maybe you could say it more concisely. I thought I heard it coming from somebody here. You're on the right track, but I just want to get it exactly correct.
Do you have 5 with greed and delusion, and 5 with hatred and delusion? Because greed and hatred are mutually exclusive. So delusion is in all of them.
Yeah.
And then greed is in 5 of them.
5.
Is it 10 total, right?
There's a total of 10 unwholesome cittas with 2 roots.
Yeah, so it'd be, the 2 roots would be greed and delusion.
Yeah.
Or hatred and delusion.
Right. Yeah, that's the right answer. It's just that you got the numbers wrong. It's 4 are with greed and delusion. I'm sorry. 8 are with greed and delusion. And 2 are with hatred and delusion. Okay, so 10 unwholesome cittas have 2 roots. Okay, then the 12 sense sphere beautiful types of consciousness, so let's use the word cittas, the 10 sense sphere beautiful cittas dissociated from knowledge have 2 roots. What are those two roots? Dissociated from knowledge, so what are the 2 roots?
Non-greed and non-hate.
Right.
I'm just looking at the chart. I really know what I'm saying. But
I'd have to ask you to cover up the chart. Okay, so these are 12 sense sphere beautiful types of consciousness dissociated from knowledge. So taking the 12 kinds, we have 4 are wholesome, 4 are resultant, 4 are functional. Let's see where we have that table of consciousness. I think page... It's 70? Yeah. Okay, if you go to page 70, then you look at sense sphere, then beautiful 24, and then under the 3 categories, wholesome, resultant, functional, you see 8, 8, 8. Of each of those groups of 8, 4 are associated with knowledge, 4 are dissociated from knowledge. And knowledge is the same as wisdom, and wisdom is the same as non-delusion. Okay, so the cittas that are dissociated from knowledge don't have the beautiful root of non-delusion. So they have 2 beautiful roots. They have non-greed and non-hatred, but they don't have non-delusion. Okay, so we have the 10 unwholesome and the 12 beautiful with 2 roots, so that makes a total of 22 with 2 roots. Okay, then we have 12 sense-sphere beautiful types of citta, 12 sense-sphere beautiful cittas associated with knowledge. So those 12, again we look on the chart on page 70. So those will be the wholesome, resultant, and functionals associated with knowledge. And knowledge, again, is the same as wisdom, the same as non-delusion. So those 12 cittas will have 3 beautiful roots. Since they're beautiful, they have to have non-greed, non-hatred. And since they're connected with knowledge, they'll have non-delusion. So those 12 sense-sphere cittas, those 12 beautiful sense-sphere cittas, have 3 roots. And then all of the 35 cittas pertaining to the jhanas and the formless meditations, and the supramundane cittas, all of them have 3 roots. So all of those who attain the jhanas, who experience the results of the jhanas, the arahats who enter the jhanas, in the 5 jhanas, the 4 immaterial meditations, whether wholesome, resultant, or functional, there'll be 3 roots. And then the paths and fruits, which are the world transcending, the supramundane cittas, those have to have wisdom. So those have 3 roots. And so when we take their total, we get 47 with 3 roots. To get the 35 sublime, let me see how we do that. Okay, we have 5 jhanas. Oh, my arithmetic is 5 jhanas. Let me look at the table. Okay. Actually, if we look at the table on page 70, you see the sublime at 27. So fine material sphere 15, immaterial sphere 12. You add them, you get 27. Then here we take the supramundane, the 4 paths and 4 fruits. So we get the 27 plus 8, 35. Well, with my bad arithmetic, I can solve the problem easily. And so we take the 12 sense-sphere beautiful cittas and the 35 sublime and supramundane, and we get 47 have 3 roots. Okay, so I think that takes us through the section on roots, and it's very helpful again to look at the table on page, I have it on 121. So if you want to look at the root and see what cittas does it occur in, on the left-hand column, you take greed, and then you go across, you see greed-rooted 8, so you get a total of 8. Hatred, well, then you see the 2 hatred-rooted, 2. Delusion, you see occurs in the greed-rooted, hatred-rooted, delusion-rooted for 12. Then you can see non-greed occurs in, actually non-greed and non-hatred both occur in the 12 sense-sphere beautifuls, the sense-sphere beautiful, the 12 sense-sphere beautiful with knowledge, the 12 without knowledge, the sublime and the supramundane. And then you see non-delusion occurs in the sense-sphere beautiful with knowledge, the sublime and the supramundane, for a total of 47. And then by taking the bottom row, you can see how many roots are present in each of those cittas. Okay, now we come to the really, maybe I'll ask whether there's any questions on the roots. And I think maybe if somebody raises the question, what is the practical relevance of this teaching on the roots? Okay, we know now we have a clear idea what are the unwholesome cittas. And so we know when we have to be very, let's say, sharp in our investigation of our own mind to know when greed is present, aversion is present. Delusion can be very difficult to detect. But at least at the outset, we have to be careful in looking for greed and aversion. And so when we detect those cittas and recognize them, we know that we can, through a training in just the act of will, we can make an effort to switch over to a wholesome kind of citta. Even if we just observe those cittas, look at them with mindfulness, observing the greed that arises, the aversion that arises. Using the Abhidhammic scheme of cittas, we know that unwholesome cittas and wholesome cittas can't be present simultaneously. It seems that we're angry, and it seems that we're looking and seeing our own anger at the same time. But that's because our mind is not able to work at the very subtle microscopic level of individual cittas and individual processes. But when we're looking at the angry mind, at that time, we've actually given rise to a wholesome citta. This would be a wholesome citta which is accompanied by knowledge, because we're understanding a mind with anger has arisen, and that is an unwholesome mind, unwholesome state of mind. And so if we persist with that observation of the angry mind, the angry thoughts, what happens when we just go on observing anger, anger, anger? After a minute or 2 minutes, what happens? You calm down, and what happens to the anger? It dissipates, right. That's because the power of the wholesome, and particularly in this case, the mindfulness, it's weakening and then dissipating the anger. So the anger is gone. Similarly, when greed arises, it's a little more difficult to get rid of greed because anger is usually, this is where the Abhidhammas usually see the anger, which is aversion or hatred, it's accompanied by displeasure, unpleasant feeling, so we want to get rid of it. But greed can be accompanied by somanassa, joyful feeling. Remember that bowl of ice cream. Stop, stop, stop. Eating ice cream, they say, is healthy for you. If I don't eat the ice cream, I'm losing too much weight. Okay, so this is some of the practical applications of understanding the way the roots function. Any other questions?
I don't know if I was going to give up, but I just wanted to just agree with the power of mindfulness, so that any of these roots, when they're experienced with mindfulness, they're no longer those roots, right? I mean, they're transformed by the very act of observing them with an openness and wanting to understand, and everything that accompanies mindfulness is the result of change, sort of automatically, right?
Yeah, the mindfulness will weaken and dissipate the unwholesome roots, but mindfulness arises in the wholesome chittas that are doing the observation. And when you're observing the mind with mindfulness and recognizing what's present in the mind, then there's also knowledge present. And so there are wholesome roots are present in the observing mind. And so as one goes on observing, one is strengthening the wholesome roots.
And I believe that it even works for greed.
And what?
I think it works for greed also.
Yeah, I said it works.
I thought you
I
said
said
you
it will work for greed. It's just that I said it's more difficult to stir up the will to get rid of greed, because greed is accompanied by joyful feeling, by pleasant feeling. And so one likes the pleasant feeling.
I see greed as, by definition, insatiable. And so it is not so pleasant to want the ice cream, because so often you finish the ice cream and all you want is more ice cream.
Yeah.
Right, so greed is dukkha.
So one can understand the drawback in greed.
Mm-hmm.
Did I see somebody with a hand there? Yeah.
I guess the challenge then arises that we have to be cognizant. We have to have, when we're in the midst of delusion, we're not able to pull up the knowledge to be aware of that in that moment, right? We're, in a sense, oblivious of not knowing that we should be reflecting on the ice cream in that moment. We're blind. It's unknown in a sense. So when we're in the midst of that delusion, in a sense, we have no road forward, because we're not able to summon knowledge to be reflective on that. So what are we able to actually do when we're, in a sense, lost in that delusion?
No, I'd say that even though we have delusion, but we're not lost in delusion, particularly because this is the purpose of the Buddha's teaching, is to give us that map and set of strategies for coming out from delusion. So one uses the Dharma, even though we're not completely free from delusion, but one uses the Dharma to understand the ways to deal with the unwholesome roots, and then eventually to eliminate delusion. One thing I should say, people like raising practical questions, that we have the two teachings, the Sutta teaching, or the teaching of the Nikayas, and the Abhidhamma teaching. And the Sutta teaching is intended to be the practical teaching, and the Abhidhamma is sort of like the theoretical teaching, which sort of is supposed to underlie the practical Sutta teaching. It's a little bit maybe like, the Abhidhamma is a bit like theoretical physics, and the Abhidhamma is like theoretical physics, and the Sutta teaching is like electronic engineering. So one uses a scientist, or the engineers will draw upon the theoretical physics of the physicists and use that to develop computer programs and devices, electronic devices that perform various functions for practical life. So if you're asking, what is the practical use of this Abhidhamma? It's sort of, in a way, I do want to show some of the practical uses, but in a way, that question is a little bit misdirected. Because we have to understand, in studying the Abhidhamma, we're trying to understand the theoretical foundations on which the Sutta teaching is built. But don't shy away from asking practical questions, and I'll try to deal with them. Okay, I think we should move into the section on function, since this is, I have to warn you, a pretty difficult section. Why are you laughing? No, I know it. Okay, now we have to make, before we even come into this section on functions, we have to make an important distinction among the cittas. Let's put a page break here. So all the cittas testing 1, 2, okay. Okay, one class is called viti cittas. The word viti originally means like road or like avenue, but it has an extended meaning which we might render process. So these are viti cittas, are cittas that occur in the citta viti, which means an active process of consciousness. This is a process of consciousness which is actively cognizing objects. We're going to see what that means as we go along. But first, just let me use that simple definition. So the viti cittas are cittas that are involved in the active cognition of objects. And these cittas occur in fixed sequences. Those fixed sequences are called citti vitas, which we translate as cognitive processes or processes of cognition. The other major grouping of cittas are called viti mutta cittas. So these are cittas that occur outside the cognitive process. And these are cittas that I referred to earlier as the subliminal, sort of subconscious or unconscious flow of cittas. And so according to the Abhidhamma, our mind is constantly oscillating between viti cittas, in which we are actively cognizing, knowing, experiencing, and processing phenomena. And then the viti mutta cittas, that subliminal flow beneath the threshold of conscious awareness. Okay, I'm going to show how the functions of consciousness relate to this distinction between, we'll call these active cittas or cognitively active cittas and passively flowing cittas. Okay, this distinction will be relevant now to the compendium of functions. Okay, so the text says, in the compendium of functions, there are 14 functions. And let's read these together in Pali. Okay, so if you look in the Pali, starting with the word patisandhi, okay, patisandhi, bhavanga, avajjana, dasana, savana, gayana, sayana, pusana, sampattichanna, santirana, votapana, javana, tadaramana, chuti. Okay, so those are the 14 functions of the chittas. And now the translation gives them here. Okay, patisandhi is what we translate rebirth linking. Bhavanga is translated life continuum. Avajjana is adverting or turning to an object. Okay, dasana is seeing, savana hearing, gayana smelling, sayana tasting, pusana touching, sampattichanna is receiving, santirana is investigating, votapana is determining. Then the word javana, there's no real adequate English translation for that. So I use the Pali word javana. Then tadaramana is registration, and chuti is death. So those are the 14 functions. Okay, then we can look to the guide to number 8. Okay, so the Abhidhamma posits altogether 14 functions performed by different kinds of consciousness. Okay, now this is the important sentence. Okay, these are exercised either at distinct phases within the cognitive process, that is from 3, adverting, to number 13, registration, or on occasions when consciousness or citta is occurring outside the cognitive process, that is, in the process-freed kinds of consciousness. And I'm going to take the order now. Instead of following the order here, I'm going to take these first, the 3 process-freed kinds of consciousness. Okay, the first of these is the patisandhi citta, the rebirth linking consciousness. This function, here I'm reading from the guide, this function is exercised at conception, the moment of conception, and it's called rebirth linking because it links the new existence to the previous existence. So this is the citta that arises at the moment conception takes place. And it's the citta that, we could say, inherits all of the past karmic tendencies of the person who has passed away, all of the accumulated karma, maybe all of the dispositions of character and tendencies in that person. All of this passes over at the moment of rebirth linking. And that consciousness, it performs this function of rebirth linking only once. So the patisandhi citta occurs only once in the course of a lifetime. Since we don't take rebirth many times in a life, we only take rebirth with one citta at the very beginning of the new life, the moment of conception. Okay, then the second type of process-freed citta is, I really like to use the Pali word, bhavanga. Okay, the word bhavanga comes from bhava means existence, and anga means a factor. So literally, bhavanga means the factor of existence. Okay, as a function, bhavanga is the function of consciousness by which the continuity of the individual is preserved through the duration of any single existence, from conception to death. Now, after the patisandhi citta, the relinking consciousness, has arisen, it arises just for a split second, then it falls away. Then it's followed by the bhavanga citta. The bhavanga citta is a resultant consciousness of the same type as the patisandhi citta. And we're going to see the types of citta that perform these functions. But the bhavanga performs a different function from the patisandhi citta. The function of the patisandhi citta is to connect the new life and the old life. The function of the bhavanga is to preserve the continuity of the new life, to preserve this life from the moment after the rebirth consciousness, the relinking consciousness, right up to the occasion of death. And so, at the very moment of conception, the patisandhi citta arises, it falls away, then there occur a series of bhavanga cittas. Each bhavanga citta arises and passes, but all of the bhavanga cittas are of the same type, the same identical type throughout the whole existence. But repeatedly, the bhavanga citta is interrupted even for the infant or the embryo in the womb, but by cognitive processes. And in adult life, or not only when the human life begins, that we call birth, then there'll be many, countless occasions when the flow of the bhavanga is interrupted by active processes by which we're seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching, thinking, and feeling emotions, and undergoing various experiences. And according to the Abhidhamma, the bhavangas arise and pass away every moment during life whenever there is no active cognitive process taking place. And now, what is occurring, even in our ordinary waking life, according to the Abhidhamma, that our minds are constantly oscillating, moving back and forth between active cognitive processes and falls into the bhavanga. So it's dropping, coming out, dropping in, coming out. So even while you are sitting here listening to me, and I'm sitting here talking, our minds are constantly falling into the bhavanga, coming out, and being, like fully aware, dropping in, coming out. But it's going on just so fast that it seems that you are listening continuously, she's translating continuously, I'm speaking continuously. But if we really had like the super microscope of the mind of a Buddha to look and to see the way the mind is functioning, we see this constant falling into the bhavanga and coming out to cognize objects. It's a little bit, to use an analogy, which is quite a good one. Okay, look at these zeros that I've made here. They seem pretty constant on the screen, right? But what I'm told by people who know computer systems better than I do, that the computer screen is constantly blanking out and reconfiguring itself, blanking out and reconfiguring many, many times in a split second. But for us, looking at, we're reading the words, it seems like nothing is happening, that they're remaining constant. But maybe if we had a mind that could function at the computer level, the level of the computer screen, we would see the screen constantly blanking, constantly coming back, blanking, coming back. And so the way the mind oscillates from bhavanga to active cognition, back to the bhavanga, then again into active cognition, is just like that, very, very rapid. But the bhavanga, we could see it, or maybe not see it, most clearly when we go into deep, dreamless sleep. Then the bhavanga is flowing pretty continuously. Okay, so then we could continue looking at this guide.
A question?
Oh, yeah, where is that? Okay.
I've never heard of this concept in Buddhism. I find it fascinating. The continuity, is this a felt sense of continuity, or like a cognitive integration of continuity, or?
I don't know what these expressions mean. A felt sense of continuity.
Well, it says here, the function of consciousness by which the continuity of the individual is preserved.
Oh, I see.
So is that, because I'm asking because I find it fascinating, and when people have trouble with the sense, with the idea of no self, they say, well, but I feel like a continuity.
I see.
Yeah, so I was wondering.
I think it would be the continuity of the bhavanga, or the bhavanga preserves the continuity of the individual, because it's the same. The bhavanga, the bhavanga consists of individual moments of the same kind of citta, repeatedly and rapidly arising and falling away. And whenever there is not an active cognitive process taking place, then the bhavanga is occurring.
Does that kind of citta differ?
I think, okay, you could ask the question, but I might have to defer questions until we cover the material.
Okay.
But maybe ask the question and I'll see whether...
Does that kind of citta that's constantly arising and falling, does that differ between individuals?
Oh, of course. Every
differs.
individual has their own bhavanga.
Their own bhavanga.
Yeah. But there are certain fixed types which we're going to see. Okay. Now I have it on page 123. When an object impinges on a sense door. You have it on 123? Okay. The bhavanga is arrested, and then an active cognitive process takes place in order to cognize the object. Okay, then immediately after the cognitive process is completed, then there comes the bhavanga occurs again. And then it will continue until the next cognitive process occurs. And this, as I said, this transition from bhavanga to cognitive process, back to bhavanga, then up again to cognitive process, is occurring so rapidly, like thousands and thousands of times, maybe millions of times in a second. And so arising and perishing at every moment during this passive phase of consciousness, the bhavanga flows on like a stream without remaining static for 2 consecutive moments. Okay, so I said I'm going to dispose of the passive cittas first. So now we jump from the bhavanga, we'll jump over to number 14, which is called the chuti citta. Which means the death. Well, the word chuti means death, and the chuti citta is the consciousness that marks the very moment of death. It's the last citta to occur in a lifetime. So the death consciousness is the last citta to occur in an individual existence. It is the citta that marks the exit from a particular life. This citta is of the same type as the rebirth linking consciousness and the bhavanga. We'll see what is meant by the same type. I'll explain shortly what's meant by the same type. The function is different, but amongst the 89 cittas, the citta that performs the rebirth function, the citta that performs the bhavanga function, the citta that performs the death function, in a single life will be the same type of citta. Just the functions are different. So the citta by which we take rebirth will be the citta with which we're either stuck or blessed through the rest of our life, and that will be the citta that will sign off when our death takes place. So it's the same type, and like them, it pertains to the process-freed side of existence, that is outside the cognitive process. It differs from the rebirth and bhavanga in that it performs a different function, namely the function of passing away. Now, something has to be said that's important. In Buddhism, we place a lot of emphasis on the state of mind when a person is dying. But the state of mind that precedes death is not the chuti citta, but that state of mind is an active cognitive process. Like some people, when they're coming into the death moment, maybe they'll get frightened or they'll get angry if they've not trained themselves. Or if they've trained themselves, if they've been, say, practicing Pure Land Buddhism, they might be reciting Amitabha's name and even see visions of Amitabha, Kuan Yin, Bodhisattva. Or if they've done mindfulness of breathing, they will be focusing on the breath and then pass away with a calm mind. That is what is happening in the last cognitive processes before death. But the death consciousness, the chuti citta, is just one little citta that just says the life is over. I compare it, you know, at the end of a movie, when the movie is over and the hero and the heroine ride into towards the horizon, living happily ever after, then the words appear, the end. So the words the end is not part of the movie, it's not part of the plot, it just means the movie is over. And so the Chuti Citta is not contributing to what's going to happen in the next life. It's just saying, the end. This life is finished. And it's a resultant citta of the same type as the rebirth and the bhavanga. Okay, so now we finished the passive cittas. And it's the bhavanga that constitutes what I call that subliminal subconscious flow. So now we come to the active. Yes, please.
So even an arahat, someone who becomes enlightened during this lifetime, would maintain a karmically resultant bhavanga until death.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, even the arhat, even the Buddha has the bhavanga. Okay, so now we come to the other cittas, which are the cittas that belong to these are the viti cittas, the cittas that belong to the cognitive process, the cittas involved in actively knowing, cognizing, or experiencing objects actively. Okay, so the first of these is the function of adverting. So when an object impinges at one of the sense doors, one of the 5 sense doors, or at the mind door, there occurs a mind moment called the bhavanga chalana, which means the vibration of the bhavanga. The vibration is used here metaphorically. Of course, a state of mind doesn't vibrate, but it's a little bit like a disruption is taking place. Of course, the bhavanga is flowing peacefully on. Now suddenly some object strikes at the eye door. And so the bhavanga is sort of shaken a little bit. And then the bhavanga, the next moment, the bhavanga arises and then it stops. So that's called the arrest or the stopping of the bhavanga. Okay, immediately after this, a citta arises turning to the object. It might turn to the object. If it's an external sense object, it will turn to one of the 5 sense doors, to the eye if there's a form, to the ear if it's a sound, or if some internal object has arisen, like some object has arisen in the mind, then the citta will turn to the inner mental object. So that function of turning to the object is called adverting. And we could see it can be either sense door adverting or mind door adverting. Okay, if it's a sense door adverting, then after that one moment of adverting, then there will arise a citta performing the function of, depending on the object, this is in the case of a sense object, seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, or feeling the touch. So in a cognitive process at the sense doors, after the moment of adverting, there arises a citta that directly cognizes the object that's arrived. So this citta and its function is determined by the nature of the object. If the object is a visible form, then it'll be eye consciousness. If it's a sound, ear consciousness, and so forth. If I get a tactile sensation, it'll be the touch consciousness or body consciousness. And remember here, seeing and hearing It doesn't mean those acts by which we identify the object, saying, this is a cup, this is the word citta, and so on. But this is a citta that the seeing citta will just take in the form of the object. The hearing consciousness, its function is just to take in the sound, and so on. So I say that it's the citta by which the sense object is experienced in its bare immediacy and simplicity. This is prior to all kinds of higher cognitive operations. Okay, the next function after seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching, whichever it is, and only one will take place in that position, then comes what's called the receiving, the function of receiving. So in a cognitive process through any of the 5 sense doors, after that function of seeing and so forth, there arise in succession cittas that perform the functions of receiving the object, sort of taking in the object, accepting the object, then investigating it, and determining the object. And these are all very, very simple, almost primitive functions. In the case of a cognitive process occurring at the mind door, these 3 functions do not occur, but rather when a mind object arises, sort of knocking at the bhavanga, then there occurs a moment called mind door adverting, and then immediately, when an object sort of knocks at the bhavanga, then there arises a moment called mind door adverting, which turns to that mental object that's appeared. So there's no need for receiving, investigating, and determining in the case of a purely mental object. Okay, then following the adverting, the determining, the moment of determining, there occur 7 cittas in succession, which are called javana. The word javana means literally running through. And this applies, this consists of a series of cittas, usually 7 cittas, all identical in kind, that run swiftly over the object in the act of apprehending it or cognizing the object. And the javana stage is the most important stage from an ethical standpoint, for it's in the javana stage that karma is created. All of the cittas leading up to the javana are either results of past karma or purely functional cittas. But the javana is the citta that creates new karma. So it creates either wholesome karma or unwholesome karma. The javana consists either of wholesome cittas or unwholesome cittas, except for the case of the arhat, who has the javanas, but the javanas for the arhat are functional cittas. They don't create either wholesome or unwholesome karma. Okay, now if the object is clear, very clear or very clear, there will take place the next function in the process. That function is called tad aramana, which is translated here as registration. And this is the function, it's explained as the function as taking as object the object that had been experienced by the jhavanas. So this function is exercised for 2 mind moments immediately after the jhavana phase in a sense sphere cognitive process when the object is either very prominent to the senses or clear to the mind. If the object is not especially prominent or clear to the mind, and in certain other types of cognitive process, then there will not be the function of registration. So following registration, or following the jhavana if there's no registration, then the stream of chittas again falls back into the bhavanga. Okay, we could see the series of functions if we look at that diagram or that table on page 155. This shows a cognitive process in the case of a complete I-door process. We already looked at this table, but we didn't have the explanation of the bhavanga at that point, or of the different functions of the chittas. Okay, so we start, we have the stream of bhavanga flowing on. Now some visible form comes into range of the eye. Then first, 1 moment of bhavanga flows by when the form comes into range. Then, number 2 is that vibration of the bhavanga. Then the 3 is that moment that when the bhavanga gets cut off. That's called the arrest. Now with so much police activity these days, I say, arrest that bhavanga. Bring them into the station for questioning. We'd have to use different terms if I were preparing this now. We call it the stopping bhavanga. Okay, so the bhavanga stops, then comes the real beginning of the process is with the 5-door adverting, number 4. Then comes the eye consciousness, and if it were a sound, it would be ear consciousness. If an odor, a nose consciousness. If a taste, a tongue consciousness. If some bodily sensation, body consciousness. So all of them will occupy step number 5. Then comes the moment of receiving the object, then the moment of investigating, then the next citta determines what the object is. Then come the 7 moments of bhavanga, 7 moments of jhavana from 9 through 15. And these will be wholesome chittas or unwholesome chittas, or if it's an arhat seeing forms, mere functional chittas. Okay, and now we're taking a very clear object, very prominent visible form. So at the end, there are 2 moments of registration. Then the series comes to an end, and the stream of bhavanga then continues or picks up again. Okay, so that takes us to registration. I've already explained the death consciousness. Then just this short passage by way of stage as tenfold. Okay, the reason it becomes tenfold, you can say there are 14 functions, but the stages are tenfold because the seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, or the eye, ear, nose, tongue, or body consciousness all occur in the same position in the series. So there are only 10 positions, but 14 functions. Okay, now I could take some questions. We'll have to really continue next time with the section on which chaitas perform which functions, but I could take some questions now. Yes, please. Yes.
So you mentioned, that when we're sleeping, the Bhavanga chitta arises and falls.
Yeah.
So when we're dreaming,
yeah,
is the same thing, or is that a different?
When we're dreaming, in the dream, the Bhavanga is interrupted. So those would be probably, we'd call those mind door cognitive processes that are sort of seeing the dream. But then, even within the dream, there'll be a constant sort of coming out of Bhavanga, seeing the dream, falling into the Bhavanga, coming up again, seeing the dream, like that. Yes, please. Yeah.
I have two questions.
Yeah.
I'm trying to figure out where Vedana fits into the cognitive processes.
Where what fits in?
Vedana.
Yeah. Okay.
Can you address
That's
that?
the question?
That's one question.
Okay. Now, Vedana is associated with every citta. So the cittas that fall into the cognitive process, all of them will have Vedanas associated with them. And I think as we continue, with the next section that I'm going to take on, today's Monday, right? Yes. Okay. Terrible. On Wednesday, then I'm going to continue with this. Then we're going to see which cittas perform which functions. And since we know already which Vedanas are associated with cittas, then we'll see which Vedanas are present on the occasion of each of those functions.
So if Vedanas are associated with all cittas, why is it that there's only karmic determinants in the javanas? Can't we react to Vedanas at any point?
Say again, I'm not sure.
So the javana stage is important for creating new karma.
Yeah.
But if Vedanas are associated with all cittas, couldn't we create new karma by reacting to any Vedana at any point?
When we react to a Vedana, the reaction occurs in the javana stage. Yeah, so all of the reactions to the Vedanas are occurring in the javana stage.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes, please.
So when you explain this on Wednesday, will you also be referring to sanya and how sanya relates to these?
No, actually, we don't really have to bring in
the aggregates?
Yeah, we don't have to bring in the aggregates or the chaitasikas at this point. We just think in terms of the cittas, which cittas are performing which functions. Of course, all of these cittas have Vedana and sanya and chaitana, some volition.
Huh. Okay.
So maybe save that question, I think sort of leading on to something else,
okay.
But save it until we go through the cittas in relation to the functions.
I have one other question. I don't understand why mind consciousness is curtailed, because it seems to me that...
Why mind consciousness is...
Well, it doesn't have the... after adverting, it doesn't have
receiving...
Right.
Yeah, it's a good question. I'm not quite...
Because it seems to me that in the mind you're using it as a seeing object or a hearing object in a way, and the objects arise in the mind in the same way that they arise.
Yeah, I know. I have that question too. I don't know the answer to that. Particularly, it seems sometimes the question arises, like you were thinking something, then immediately you sort of reflect back and say, what was I thinking? Then you're sort of searching back to investigate and determine what you were thinking. Like an idea came into your mind and you said, I was just about to say something and then I forgot what I was thinking. Then you're sort of searching back and trying to investigate and then determine what was I thinking 10 seconds ago. I don't have a good answer to the question. Yes, please.
Okay, thank you, Venerable. I was just curious, why are there 2 registration steps?
I could only say, perhaps because in order for the registration to actually take place, it has to occur 2 times. Otherwise, I don't know another answer to that. We could also say, why are there 7 javanas?
Yeah, that would be my next question.
Yeah. Okay, I think we've come to the 5:30, so we'll end for the day and then pick up on Wednesday. So we're going to end with the the dedication of the merits. Okay, so we share the merit with the Dharma protecting devas, the nagas or the nagas are the dragon spirits, and the bhutas or the fair spirits, as well as to all beings. Akasata chabumata deva naga mahitika punyantang anumoditva chirang rakantu sasanang. Akasata chabumata deva naga mahitika punyantang anumoditva chirang rakantu desanang. Akasata chabumata deva naga mahitika punyantang anumoditva chirang rakantu mang parang. Itavata cham hehi sampadang punya sampadang sabbe deva anumodantu sabba sampati siddhya. Etavata cham hehi sampadang punya sampadang sabbe bhuta anumodantu sabba sampati siddhya. Etavata cham hehi sampadang punya sampadang sabbe satanumodantu sabba sampati siddhya. Bhavagopadaya avici hetato etantare satakai upapana rupya rupicha asanya sanyino dukkha pamuchantu pusantu nibbutting.